The ballroom of Blackthorn Castle was full of light and music, but Alena Vos felt like the coldest person in the room. She stood near the tall glass doors, wearing a silver gown that shimmered every time she moved, and beside her sat an empty golden chair. That chair belonged to her mate. It had been empty for 3 years. Around her, wolves in human form danced and laughed, their laughter echoing off the high stone walls. Somewhere in that crowd was Damian Blackthorn, the Alpha King, the most powerful shifter in the Northern Territories, and the man the fates had chosen to be her husband. He was not dancing with her. He was not even looking at her. He stood across the room, deep in conversation with his counsel, acting as if the golden chair beside Alena did not exist, as if she did not exist. A young pack member named Grace, who worked with Alena in the healing house, came to stand beside her. Grace squeezed her hand gently. "You look beautiful tonight, Luna," Grace whispered. Alena smiled, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "Thank you, Grace. Though I wonder if anyone else in this room even remembers I hold that title." Grace opened her mouth to argue, but she could not, because it was true. Everyone in Blackthorn Park knew the story. 3 years ago, on the night Alena turned 18, the moon had marked her as Damian's true mate. It should have been the happiest night of her life. Instead, Damian had looked at her with such coldness that the entire hall had gone silent. He had turned away without a single word and walked out into the night, leaving his newly marked mate standing alone under the silver moonlight. Since then, nothing had changed. Damian never touched her. He never spoke more than a few polite sentences to her in private. He never asked the elder council to complete the mate bonding ceremony that would make their connection permanent and whole. Alena had learned to live with silence, but silence was slowly eating away at something inside her. She excused herself from Grace and walked toward the balcony doors, needing air, needing space from the noise and the pretending. Outside, the night was cool and the stars were bright over the dark forest that surrounded the castle. Alena gripped the stone railing and closed her eyes, letting her wolf, Nyx, rise just beneath her skin. Nyx was tired. Alena could feel it in her bones. A wolf whose mate bond was never completed slowly grew weaker, as if a part of her soul had been locked away and forgotten. Alena had noticed it for months now, the way her energy faded faster than it used to, the way small wounds took longer to heal, the way her reflection in the mirror sometimes looked pale and thin despite eating well and sleeping enough. She had told no one, not even Grace, because she was afraid that saying it aloud would make it more real. Footsteps approached behind her, heavy and confident. She knew that walk. Only one person moved through the world like he owned every inch of it. "You should be inside," Damian said, his voice deep and flat, the voice of a king giving an order, not a husband speaking to his wife. Alena did not turn around. "I needed air. The council is asking questions about your absence." "Let them ask," she said quietly. "Perhaps someone should finally answer why their Luna sits beside an empty chair every single year." Silence stretched between them, sharp as a blade. Alena finally turned to face him. Damian stood tall and powerful, his dark eyes unreadable, his jaw tight with something that might have been anger or might have been nothing at all. She used to try to read his expressions. Now she had given up trying. "You know why," he said finally, and his voice had an edge to it now, something dangerous and old. "I know that you loved someone before me," Alena said, refusing to look away. "I know her name was Seraphine, and I know she died. I have known this for 3 years, Damian. But I am not her replacement. I never asked to be your mate. The moon chose me, just as it chose you. And still, you punish me for a tragedy I had nothing to do with." Something flickered across his face, gone before she could name it. For one moment, she thought he might actually respond, might actually open the locked door between them. Instead, he straightened his shoulders and looked past her, toward the castle. "The bonding ceremony will happen when I decide it should happen," he said. "Not before." "It has been 3 years," Alena whispered. "Then it can be 3 more," Damian answered, and turned to walk back inside, leaving her alone on the balcony with the stars and the cold and the ache that never seemed to leave her chest. Alena stood there long after he disappeared, staring at the dark forest until the music inside faded into a low hum. She thought about the years she had spent trying to be patient, trying to prove herself worthy of a bond that Damien refused to complete. She had healed the sick in the park's healing house with her own hands. She had settled disputes between families when the council could not agree. She had mentored young wolves who had lost their parents in past battles, teaching them to control their shifts, to be proud of what they were. The pack loved her. Everyone loved her, it seemed, except the one man whose love was supposed to matter most. She walked back inside just long enough to say goodnight to a few pack elders, forcing warmth into her voice despite the hollow feeling inside her chest. As she crossed the ballroom floor, she overheard two council members speaking near a marble pillar, their voices low but not low enough. The Alpha King requested another delay, one of them said, an older wolf named Edward, who had served the Blackthorn family for decades. He told the elders he is not ready for the bonding ceremony. Again. How long can this go on? The second voice asked, a woman Alena recognized as Claire, one of the senior healers. The Luna's wolf grows weaker every season. Everyone can see it, even if no one dares say it aloud. It is not our place to question the Alpha King's grief, Edward said quietly. Grief, Claire repeated, her voice sharp with disapproval. It has been 3 years, Edward. At what point does grief become cruelty? Alena stopped walking, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. She had suspected the truth for a long time, but hearing it spoken plainly by the park's own council members made it undeniable. Damien had not simply failed to complete the bond. He had actively asked for it to be delayed, over and over, year after year, while she stood beside him in public and starved in private. She turned quietly and left before either of them noticed her, walking swiftly through the corridors until she reached her private chambers. She shut the door behind her and pressed her back against it, breathing hard, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. For 3 years, she had told herself that patience was strength. She had told herself that love, real love, required understanding and time. She had told herself that Damien's silence was pain, not rejection, and that one day the ice around his heart would melt for her the way it once had for someone else. But standing there in the darkness of her room, she finally allowed herself to admit a truth she had buried for far too long. Damien was never going to choose her. Not because the fates had made a mistake, but because he refused to let them be right. He was not protecting a memory. He was punishing her for being alive when someone else was not. Alena walked to the window and looked out over the sleeping forest, over the parklands that stretched for miles beyond the castle walls, lands she had come to think of as home even though the man who ruled them had never once made her feel welcome in his life. Somewhere out there, beyond these borders, the world was larger than the Blackthorn Park. She had never let herself think about that before. She had always believed her place was here, waiting, hoping, healing everyone except herself. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Alena allowed herself to imagine a different life. Not a life of grand escape or dramatic rebellion, simply a life where she was not invisible, where she was not compared to a memory she could never replace, where her own heart mattered as much as anyone else's. She did not know yet how that life would begin. She only knew, lying awake as the moon crossed slowly over the castle towers, that something inside her had finally, quietly, broken free of its patience. And once patience breaks, it rarely comes back the same way it left. Sleep never truly came that night. Alena rose before dawn, dressed in simple clothes, and walked the long path down to the healing house at the edge of the park village. The building smelled of dried herbs and warm bread, and the early morning light spilled softly through its windows. Claire was already there, sorting bottles of medicine along a wooden shelf, her sleeves rolled up and her grey hair tied back. "You are here early, Luna," Claire said, surprised but pleased. "I could not sleep," Alena admitted, taking a seat on a low stool beside the work table. "I heard you and Edward speaking last night, at the ball." Claire's hand stilled over the bottles. She turned slowly, her expression careful. "I did not know you were near." "I was not trying to listen," Alena said. "But I am glad I did. I think it is time someone spoke honestly with me, Claire. Please. I can bear the truth better than I can bear more silence." Claire studied her for a long moment, then set down the bottle in her hand and pulled a chair closer, sitting so that her knees nearly touched Elena's. Her voice, when she spoke, was gentle but firm, the voice of a healer who had delivered hard news many times before. Your wolf is weakening, Elena. I have watched it happen slowly over these past 2 years, though I dared not speak of it directly, not without your invitation. A mate bond that is marked but never completed places a strange burden on a shifter spirit. It is like a door left half open in a storm. The connection pulls at your energy, at your healing, at your strength, but gives nothing back in return. Your body is trying to hold together something that was never allowed to become whole. Elena's throat tightened. How much time does that give me? I cannot say for certain, Claire admitted. Every wolf is different. Some live for many years in this condition, weakened but functioning. Others fade much faster. What I can tell you is that it does not get better on its own. It only gets worse, unless the bond is completed, or unless. Claire paused, choosing her next words with visible caution. Unless what? Elena pressed. Unless the mark is somehow broken, and the wolf finds a way to heal outside of it. It is rare. Dangerous. Not something any healer would recommend lightly. But it has happened before, in old stories from other packs, wolves who left their bonded territory and found strength in bloodlines untouched by the broken mark. Elena sat in silence, absorbing every word. For the first time, what had felt like a vague, formless fear the night before now had a shape, a name, a certainty. She was not imagining her exhaustion. She was not simply sad. She was, in the quiet and patient way of nature, dying by inches inside a marriage that had never truly begun. She thanked Claire and walked home through the park village as the sun rose fully over the trees, greeting familiar faces along the way, smiling at children who waved to her, nodding to elders who bowed their heads in respect. Everyone here loved their Luna. Everyone here believed she was strong and steady and endlessly patient. None of them knew that inside, she had just been given a choice far larger than patience could solve. 3 days passed before Elena found the courage to face Damien directly. She waited until evening, when the castle grew quiet and most of the pack had returned to their homes, and she found him in his study, bent over a stack of papers by candlelight. He did not look up when she entered. I need to speak with you, Elena said, closing the door behind her. I am busy, Damien answered, not lifting his eyes from the page in front of him. You are always busy, Elena said, walking closer until she stood directly across the desk from him. For 3 years, you have always been busy whenever I needed a single moment of your attention. Tonight, you will give it to me. Something in her voice made him finally look up. Perhaps it was the steadiness in it, so different from the careful, apologetic tone she usually used around him. His dark eyes studied her face for a long moment, unreadable as ever. Say what you came to say, he said. I know you asked the elder council to delay our bonding ceremony again, Elena said. Not once. Not twice. Every single year since we were marked. I know my wolf is growing weaker because of it. Claire told me everything. I want to hear it from you. Why? Why continue a marriage you clearly never wanted, instead of simply releasing me to live a life where I might actually be happy? Damien set down his pen slowly, his jaw tightening. Releasing a mate bond is not a simple thing, Elena. You know this. Then complete it, she said, her voice rising slightly despite her effort to stay calm. Or release me through the old rites, painful as they are. Anything, Damien. Anything is better than this waiting. This being nothing to you while the whole pack watches and pities me. You are not nothing, he said quietly, and for a moment, something almost human flickered behind his eyes. Then what am I? Elena demanded. Tell me one true thing about how you see me, Damien. Just one. The silence that followed felt like it lasted an eternity. Damien looked away first, his gaze falling to the papers on his desk, to anything except her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough, as though the words cost him more than she could imagine. You remind me of things I am not ready to feel again, he said. That is not fair to you. I know this. But I do not know how to be anything other than what I have become. Then let me go, Elena whispered. If you cannot love me, And you will not release the anger that keeps you from trying, then let me go somewhere I might find peace on my own. Damien's eyes hardened again, the brief crack in his armor sealing shut as quickly as it had opened. The bond was an accident of fate, he said coldly. I never asked for it. I never asked for you. If you wish to seek peace elsewhere, that is your choice to make, but do not expect me to hand you freedom I never promised. The words landed like a physical blow. Alena stood very still, absorbing the cruelty of it, the finality. She had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that honesty might soften something between them. Instead, it had only confirmed what she already suspected. There was nothing left to hope for here. Thank you, she said quietly, for finally being honest with me. Damien rose from his chair as though to say something further, some half-formed word catching in his throat, but Alena did not wait to hear it. Whatever excuse or explanation he might offer now would only soften a truth she needed to keep sharp and whole inside her, a truth she could finally use to guide her next steps instead of forgive away. She turned and left the study without waiting for a response, walking through the dim corridors of the castle with a strange, hollow calm settling over her. Portraits of past black-thorn alphas and their lunas lined the stone walls, generations of mated pairs who had ruled the pack together, their painted faces watching her pass with painted eyes that seemed, tonight, almost pitying. She had walked this corridor 1,000 times without truly seeing those paintings. Tonight, she studied each one, wondering how many of those long-dead lunas had known real love from their alphas, and how many had simply learned, as she had, to smile through emptiness for the sake of pack unity. She did not cry. She had cried enough over the years for a man who would never notice her tears. Instead, she walked to her chambers and sat by the window, staring out at the dark forest, feeling something shift inside her chest, quiet and final, like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. A soft knock came at her door only minutes later. It was Grace, her expression worried, having clearly heard some echo of raised voices carrying faintly through the castle's old stone halls. I heard shouting near the study, Grace said, stepping inside and closing the door gently behind her. Are you well, Luna? Alena managed a small, tired smile. I am well, Grace. Better, perhaps, than I have been in a long while. Grace studied her carefully, clearly unconvinced by the calm in Elena's voice. She sat down on the edge of the bed beside her, taking Elena's hand between both of her own. You do not have to pretend with me. I have watched you carry this pain quietly for 3 years, smiling for the pack while breaking slowly on the inside. I wish I could do more to help you. You have helped me more than you know, Alena said softly. Your friendship has been one of the few true comforts I have had here. But Grace, I need to ask something of you, and I need you to promise me honesty in return. Anything, Grace said immediately. If I were to leave this place, even for a little while, would you think me a coward? Would you think I had abandoned the pack, abandoned the people who depend on me? Grace's eyes filled with sudden understanding, and perhaps a touch of sorrow, though she did not look away. I would think you finally chose yourself, Luna, after years of choosing everyone else first. No one who truly loves you could call that cowardice. Alena squeezed her hand gratefully, feeling tears rise now, not from pain this time, but from the simple relief of being understood. She did not cry. She had cried enough over the years for a man who would never notice her tears. Instead, she walked to her chambers and sat by the window, staring out at the dark forest, feeling something shift inside her chest, quiet and final, like a key turning in a lock that had been stuck for years. That night, a soft knock came at her door. It was Grace, holding a small sealed letter in her hands, her expression puzzled. This arrived for you, Luna, Grace said. A traveling messenger brought it. She said it came from beyond the eastern mountains, from Ashford territory. Alena frowned, taking the letter carefully. She did not know anyone in Ashford territory. As far as she knew, the Ashford Pack had been exiled from the Greater Alliance of Packs decades ago, their lands considered distant and forgotten, spoken of only in old rumors and cautionary tales told to young pups who wandered too far from home. She thanked Grace and closed the door, sitting on the edge of her bed as she broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter with careful hands. The handwriting inside was elegant and slightly shaky, the writing of someone older, someone who had perhaps written many letters in her lifetime. Dear Alena, the letter began, "You do not know me, though we share more blood than you might imagine. My name is Eleanor Ashford, and I am your mother's aunt, a relation your family chose to forget many years ago when old disagreements divided our bloodlines. I have followed your life from a distance, through messengers and old friends who still remember the Ashford name kindly. I know of your marriage to the Blackthorn Alpha. I know, too, of the silence that has surrounded you these past years, for such things travel between parks whether we wish them to or not. I do not write to interfere in matters that are yours alone to decide. I write because I believe you carry a gift within you that has never been given the chance to awaken, a gift that runs strong in our bloodline but weak in the park you now call home. If you ever wish to know more of where you come from, my doors are open to you, without condition, without expectation. Come whenever you are ready, Alena. Stay as long as you need. No one here will ask you to be anything other than exactly who you are. With love you have never known, your great-aunt, Eleanor Ashford." Alena read the letter 3 times before setting it down on her lap, her hands trembling slightly. She had never heard the name Eleanor Ashford before, never known that her mother's family held any connection to a park beyond the Blackthorn borders. Her parents had died when she was young, killed in a territory dispute long before she came of age, and she had grown up believing she had no family left in the world except the park that had taken her in and, eventually, married her to its cold and distant king. Now, holding this letter in her hands, Alena felt something she had not felt in years. Possibility. She thought of Claire's words in the healing house, about bloodlines untouched by the broken mark, about wolves who found strength beyond the boundaries of an unfinished bond. She thought of Damien's cold declaration only hours earlier, that he had never asked for her, that he owed her no freedom he had not already promised. She thought of 3 years of empty chairs and empty rooms and empty conversations that led nowhere. For the first time since she had arrived at Blackthorn Castle as a frightened 18-year-old bride, Alena allowed herself to imagine living. Not running away in shame, not disappearing into hiding, but walking, deliberately and with purpose, toward a door that had just opened for her, toward family she never knew she had, toward a version of herself that might finally be allowed to grow. She spent the following days in careful preparation, telling no one of her true intentions except Grace, who she trusted completely and who promised, with tears in her eyes, to keep her secret until Alena was safely gone. She informed the household staff that she would be taking a short journey to visit distant relatives, a story vague enough not to raise alarm, since Alena rarely left the castle grounds and no one questioned Eluna's occasional need for quiet travel. She packed lightly, choosing only what she could carry easily, practical clothing suited for travel rather than the elegant gowns that filled her wardrobe. She left behind the jewelry Damien had given her during former occasions, pieces that had always felt more like a costume than a gift. She kept only a small locket that had belonged to her mother, the one piece of her old life that felt truly her own. On her final night in the castle, Alena stood once more at her window, looking out over the parklands she had come to know so well over 3 long years. Somewhere in the castle, Damien worked late in his study, as he always did, unaware that this would be the last night his silence would fall upon a wife who still lived beneath his roof. She felt no anger as she looked out at the darkness, only a strange, quiet clarity, the calm of someone who has finally stopped waiting for a door to open from the other side and has decided, instead, to walk through one of her own. Before dawn broke over the eastern mountains, Alena Voss slipped quietly out of Blackthorn Castle, carrying only a small bag, a sealed letter tucked safely inside her coat, and a heart that, for the first time in years, beat with something other than quiet grief. She did not look back at the towers behind her. She walked forward, toward mountains she had never crossed, toward a family she had never met, toward a life that, whatever it became, would finally, truly, belong to her. The journey across the eastern mountains took 4 days, longer than Alena had expected, through narrow paths that wound between tall pines and rocky cliffs that no carriage could cross safely. She traveled on foot for much of it, occasionally accepting rides from traders who moved between territories and asked no questions of a quiet woman traveling alone. By the time she reached the valley that marked the beginning of Ashford Lands, her boots were worn through and her legs ached with every step, but something in her chest felt lighter than it had in years. The Ashford village sat nestled between 2 low mountains, smaller than Blackthorn's grand castle grounds but no less alive. Wooden houses with warm-lit windows lined winding streets, and the scent of pine and wood smoke filled the cool mountain air. Children ran between houses, laughing, unafraid, and elders sat on porches watching the evening settle over the valley. It looked, Alena thought, like a place that had learned to be happy despite being forgotten by the wider world. She found Eleanor Ashford's home near the center of the village, a modest stone house with ivy climbing along its walls. Before she could even knock, the door opened, and an elderly woman with silver hair and sharp, kind eyes stood in the doorway, studying her with an expression that mixed surprise and deep recognition all at once. "You have your mother's eyes," Eleanor said softly, before Alena could even introduce herself. "I would know that face anywhere." Alena felt tears rise unexpectedly to her eyes. "You knew my mother?" "I knew her well, once, before pride and old arguments tore our families apart," Eleanor said, stepping aside to let Alena into the warm house. "Come in, child. You must be exhausted. We have much to discuss, and plenty of time now to discuss it." Over the following days, Alena learned more about her family history than she had known in her entire life. Eleanor explained, over cups of warm tea by the fireplace, that Elena's mother had been born into the Ashford bloodline, a line known for rare gifts tied not to raw strength or speed, but to healing and connection with the natural elements around them. Generations ago, a disagreement over pack leadership had split the family, sending Elena's mother away to marry into a smaller, unrelated pack, severing ties that had never fully mended even after her death. "Your gifts have likely been sleeping inside you your entire life," Eleanor explained one evening, watching Alena carefully across the small wooden table between them. "Blackthorn Pack values strength and dominance above all else. Such an environment can suppress gifts like ours without anyone realizing it. Here, in Ashford territory, closer to the land your bloodline is truly tied to, those gifts may finally have room to breathe." Alena was skeptical at first, uncertain whether such things could truly be real, but within weeks, she began to notice small changes. Wounds on her hands from travel healed faster than they should have. She found herself instinctively sensing the health of plants and animals around the village, understanding without being told which herbs would ease a fever or calm a restless child. Her wolf, Nix, who had felt weak and distant for so long, began to stir with new energy, as though finally remembering strength she had forgotten she possessed. It was during this time of quiet discovery that Alena first met Kieran Ashford, the young alpha who led the pack in his aging father's stead. She encountered him one afternoon near the edge of the training grounds, where he was overseeing a group of young wolves practicing their control during partial shifts. He noticed her watching from a distance and approached with an easy, unhurried confidence that felt entirely different from anything she had known at Blackthorn. "You must be Eleanor's guest," Kieran said, offering a polite nod. "The whole village has been curious about you." "Alena," she said, extending her hand. "I hope my presence has not caused too much talk." Kieran smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached his eyes easily. "Ashford thrives on talk. It is one of our few entertainments out here, away from the busier parks. But I mean no offense by it. Everyone has only spoken kindly of you." Over the following weeks, Alena found herself spending more time in Kieran's company, though never in ways that felt forced or expected. He would find her sitting near the healing garden and ask thoughtful questions about her work, genuinely curious rather than simply polite. He would invite her to join pack gatherings, always making sure she felt welcome rather than obligated. Unlike Damien, he never made her feel invisible, nor did he rush toward assumptions about what her presence in his territory might mean for their futures. "You do not have to entertain me out of duty," Alena told him once, as they walked together along a quiet forest path during an early evening. "I know I am something of a curiosity here," a mate cast aside by another alpha. "You need not feel obligated to make me feel welcome." Kieran stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his expression serious for once instead of easy and light. "I do not spend time with you out of obligation, Alena. I spend time with you because I find your company genuinely enjoyable, and because I think you deserve to be seen as more than a story other people whisper about. You are allowed to simply exist here, without explaining or justifying yourself to anyone." Alena felt something warm bloom in her chest at his words, something she had not felt in years, the simple, uncomplicated comfort of being valued without condition. She did not yet know what to call the feeling growing between them, whether friendship or something deeper, but she allowed herself, for the first time in a long while, to simply enjoy it without fear. One morning, a few weeks after her arrival, Alena woke to a strange pulling sensation beneath her skin, urgent and unfamiliar, drawing her attention toward the eastern edge of the village where the healing garden bordered a small stretch of wild forest. She dressed quickly and followed the sensation without fully understanding it, arriving to find a young boy named Oliver lying still beneath a fallen branch, his leg twisted awkwardly, his face pale from pain and fear. "Help him," Oliver's older sister cried, kneeling beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Please, someone help him." Alena knelt instinctively, placing her hands gently over the boy's injured leg without fully thinking through what she intended to do. Warmth spread from her palms, steady and controlled, and to her own astonishment, she felt the fractured bone beneath her fingers begin to knit slowly back into place, the boy's pained whimper softening gradually into surprised relief. "How did you do that?" the sister asked, staring at Alena with wide, disbelieving eyes. Alena stared down at her own hands, equally astonished. "I am not entirely certain," she admitted honestly. "I simply felt where the pain was, and something inside me knew what to do." Word of the incident spread quickly through the village, and by evening, Eleanor sat with Alena beside the fireplace, studying her grandniece with quiet pride. "Your gift is awakening faster than most," Eleanor said. "It took me years to learn even simple healing touches when I was young. You are finding this ability within weeks, which tells me your bloodline runs stronger in you than even I imagined." "Why now?" Alena asked. "Why did none of this appear during my years at Blackthorn?" "Perhaps," Eleanor said gently, "because a heart that spends every day defending itself against rejection has little room left to discover anything new. Gifts like ours require openness, Alena. They require a person who feels safe enough to stop guarding herself so completely. Blackthorn never gave you that safety. Perhaps, here, you have finally found it." Alena thought about those words often in the weeks that followed, noticing how her instincts continued sharpening with practice, how her wolf nicks grew steadily stronger beneath her skin, more present and more responsive than she had felt in years. She began joining Margaret regularly at the healing house, assisting with everything from simple fevers to more complicated injuries, earning quiet respect throughout the village for hands that seemed to understand pain before words could even describe it. Kieran, too, remained a steady presence throughout this period of growth, though he was careful never to crowd the space she needed to rebuild herself. He would occasionally join her on quiet evening walks along the forest paths bordering the village, content simply to listen as she spoke about her discoveries, her small victories, her growing sense of belonging within a place she had never expected to call home. "You seem different tonight," Kieran observed one such evening, as they walked together beneath a canopy of early stars. "Lighter, somehow." "I feel different," Alena admitted. "For years, I measured my worth entirely through someone else's silence. Here, I am beginning to measure it through my own hands, my own choices. It is strange, learning to trust myself again after so long." "You are allowed to take all the time you need," Kieran said simply, and Alena found herself, once again, grateful for a kindness that asked for nothing in return. Meanwhile, far across the eastern mountains, life inside Blackthorn Castle continued much as it always had, except for one detail that gradually became impossible to ignore. Damien noticed Elena's absence first in small ways he barely registered: an empty chair at breakfast, quiet hallways where her footsteps used to pass. He assumed, at first, that she was simply occupied with her healing house duties or visiting families within the village, as she often did. It was only when the next pack ball arrived, weeks later, that her absence became impossible to overlook. The golden chair beside his throne sat empty, as it always had, but for the first time, its emptiness felt different, noticed by every guest in the hall, whispered about behind raised hands and lowered eyes. Edward approached him quietly during the evening, his expression troubled. "Alpha King, forgive my intrusion, but where is the Luna this evening?" Damien frowned, glancing toward the empty chair as though seeing it clearly for the first time in years. "She is visiting distant relatives, I believe. She informed the household staff before leaving." "That was over a month ago, my Alpha," Edward said carefully. "No further word has come from her since. Some among the council have begun to worry." Damien said nothing, but a strange, unfamiliar tightness settled in his chest, an ache that felt entirely unlike grief for Seraphine, though it echoed with a similar heaviness. He told himself it was simply irritation at the disruption to pack order, nothing more. But that night, alone in his private chambers, he found himself unable to sleep, his mind circling back again and again to Elena's absence, to the quiet, steady presence he had, without realizing it, come to depend upon far more than he had ever admitted. His wolf, long dormant since Seraphine's death, stirred restlessly beneath his skin, sensing something Damien himself refused to name. The mate bond between them, though never completed, still connected them in subtle ways, a thread stretching across distance and time. That thread, Damien slowly began to realize, felt different now. Weaker. Strained, as though pulled taut by something happening far beyond his reach. He summoned his trackers the following morning, ordering them to locate Elena's whereabouts and confirm her safety, telling himself the order was simply a matter of pack responsibility, nothing more personal than that. The trackers returned 2 weeks later, exhausted and unsuccessful, reporting that Elena's trail led toward the eastern mountains before disappearing entirely near territory belonging to the Ashford Pack, a pack whose borders had been sealed through old alliances that Blackthorn held no authority to cross. Sealed borders, Damien repeated, staring at his trackers with barely contained frustration. On what grounds? Ashford has long guarded its independence, my Alpha, the lead tracker explained cautiously. They honor old agreements protecting travelers who seek refuge within their lands. Without direct invitation or formal diplomatic request, we have no legal path to search further. Damien dismissed his trackers with a curt wave, sitting alone in his study long after they left, staring at the map spread across his desk, at the small mountain range separating Blackthorn territory from the distant, half-forgotten lands of Ashford. For 3 years, he had told himself that his silence toward Elena caused no real harm, that she remained safe and cared for within his castle regardless of his emotional distance. Now, faced with the reality of her absence and the strange, hollow ache spreading through his chest, he began, slowly and reluctantly, to question everything he had convinced himself was true. He did not yet understand the full weight of what he had lost through his own silence. But sitting alone in the quiet of his study, staring at a map that separated him from his mate, Damien Blackthorn felt, for the first time in 3 years, truly and completely afraid. As the months passed, Elena's transformation became impossible to miss, even to herself. The pale, tired woman who had arrived at Ashford's borders with warm boots and a heavy heart had slowly given way to someone stronger, someone whose eyes held light instead of quiet resignation. Her gift continued to grow, steady and sure, until the village healer, an older woman named Margaret, began inviting her to assist with even the most difficult cases, trusting Elena's growing instinct as much as her own decades of experience. You have a rare gift, dear, Margaret told her one afternoon, as they worked together preparing remedies for a child suffering from a persistent fever. Not just in knowledge, but in feeling. You sense what a body needs almost before it tells you. That cannot be taught. It can only be uncovered. Elena smiled at the praise, still unused to being recognized for her own worth rather than her position beside someone else's throne. Here in Ashford, no one called her Luna. No one whispered about empty chairs or unfinished bonds. She was simply Elena, valued for her hands, her heart, and her steadily growing strength. Her friendship with Kieran deepened alongside her personal growth, evolving slowly and naturally into something neither of them rushed to name. He never pressed her for more than she was ready to give, understanding, without needing to be told, the wounds she carried from years of neglect. Instead, he showed his growing affection through small, steady gestures, walking her home after long days at the healing house, bringing her favorite tea when she worked too late, remembering details about her life that she had mentioned only once in passing. One evening, as autumn began settling over the valley and the leaves turned golden across the mountain slopes, Kieran invited Elena to join him for a quiet dinner at his family home, away from the usual bustle of pack gatherings. The evening was simple but thoughtful, filled with easy conversation and comfortable silences that never once felt empty the way silence with Damien always had. I want to be honest with you, Kieran said, as they sat together near the fireplace after dinner, the flames casting warm light across the room. I have grown to care for you deeply, Elena. Not out of pity for what happened at Blackthorn, and not out of curiosity about a story others whisper about. I care for you because of who you are, plainly and simply. I do not wish to rush you, nor do I expect anything from you that you are not ready to offer. But I wanted you to know where my heart stands. Alena felt tears rise unexpectedly to her eyes, though this time they were not born of pain. No one has ever spoken to me this way before, she admitted quietly. I do not yet know what I am ready for, Kieran. My heart still carries wounds I am only beginning to heal. But I care for you too. More than I expected to, given how carefully I have guarded myself these past years. Kieran reached for her hand gently, not pulling her closer, simply holding it within his own. Then we will go slowly, he said. There is no bond of fate pulling us together, Alena, only choice. And I would rather build something real through choice than force something forced through fate. Whatever we become, we will decide it together, at whatever pace feels right to you. For the first time in years, Alena allowed herself to imagine a future not defined by waiting, not shaped by another person's grief or silence, but built deliberately, choice by choice, alongside someone who valued her plainly for who she was. She did not rush toward any decision about Kieran's feelings, choosing instead to let the relationship unfold naturally over the following weeks, testing her own heart carefully after years of learning to distrust it. She noticed, with some surprise, that she looked forward to seeing him each day, that his easy laughter had become a comfort she welcomed rather than a distraction she tolerated. Still, some quiet, cautious part of her held back, fully committing her heart, aware that healing took time, and that rushing into anything, even something as gentle and patient as what Kieran offered, might risk repeating old patterns of losing herself for someone else's comfort. Grace sent word occasionally through careful, trusted messengers, letters that traveled slowly across the mountains but carried news of the park Alena had left behind. Grace wrote that the park continued to function well under the council's steady guidance, that no one questioned the Luna's extended absence too loudly, though whispers persisted quietly among those who suspected the truth. Alena read each letter carefully, grateful for the connection to her old life without feeling pulled backward into its familiar patterns of quiet suffering. Meanwhile, across the eastern mountains, Damien's world had begun to unravel in ways he could neither control nor fully understand. The strange, hollow ache that had first appeared the night he learned of Elena's prolonged absence had grown steadily worse, evolving from a vague discomfort into something closer to physical pain. His sleep grew restless, filled with fragmented images he could not immediately explain, flashes of golden autumn light, of a mountain village he had never visited, of Elena's face, healthier and more radiant than he remembered, laughing freely in ways she had rarely done within his own castle walls. At first, Damien dismissed these visions as simple stress, the natural result of pack responsibilities weighing heavily upon him. But as weeks passed and the images grew clearer, more detailed, more persistent, he began to suspect something deeper was occurring, something tied directly to the weakening mate bond stretched in between himself and Alena. He sought counsel from the park's oldest healer, an elderly man named Simon who had served 3 generations of Blackthorn Alphas. The bond is fraying, my Alpha, Simon explained gravely, after listening carefully to Damien's description of the visions and the physical discomfort accompanying them. A mate bond marked but never completed does not simply disappear when ignored. It searches, in its own way, for completion. Sometimes, when the marked mate begins to heal and grow strong through other means, fragments of her experience bleed across the weakened connection toward her bonded partner. What you are seeing, Alpha King, may well be glimpses of Elena's life as it unfolds without you. Damien sat in silence, absorbing the weight of Simon's words. The idea that he could glimpse fragments of Elena's growing happiness, her healing, her strength, without being able to reach her directly, filled him with a frustration he struggled to name. It was in one such vision, clearer and more vivid than the others, that he first witnessed something that shattered whatever remained of his careful indifference entirely. He saw Alena seated near a warm fireplace, her hand held gently within another man's grasp, her expression soft and open in a way she had never once shown toward him. He did not recognize the man's face clearly, only broad shoulders and dark hair, but the tenderness in the scene struck Damien with a force he had not expected, a sharp, unfamiliar heat rising through his chest that he eventually recognized, with great reluctance, as jealousy. He woke from that particular vision breathing hard, his wolf snarling just beneath his skin, restless and possessive in a way it had not behaved in years. For 3 years, Damien had told himself that his silence toward Alena caused no true harm, that his heart remained closed for reasons beyond his control. Now, faced with the vivid image of her happiness beside another man, he was forced to confront a truth he had avoided for far too long. Whatever he had told himself about grief and duty, some part of him had never truly wanted to lose her. He had simply never allowed himself to admit it, until the possibility of losing her completely became suddenly, painfully real. Within days, Damien made a decision that shocked his entire council. He announced his intention to travel personally to Ashford territory, defying long-standing diplomatic protocol that required formal request and careful negotiation before any Alpha crossed into another pack's sealed borders. Edward attempted to counsel caution, warning that such an impulsive journey could damage fragile alliances built over decades, but Damien would not be swayed. "I have spent 3 years hiding behind protocol and grief," Damien said firmly, silencing further objection. "I will not spend a single day more hiding from a mistake I am finally ready to correct." He traveled alone, refusing an armed escort, understanding instinctively that arriving at Ashford's borders with a show of force would only confirm every fear their sealed territory sought to guard against. The journey across the mountains took him 4 days, much as it had taken Alena months earlier, though his pace was faster, driven by an urgency he had not felt in years. When he finally reached the edge of Ashford village, he was stopped by 2 young guards who eyed him warily, recognizing immediately the unmistakable presence of an Alpha king standing uninvited at their borders. Word spread quickly through the village, and within the hour, Kieran himself arrived to address the unexpected arrival personally, his expression guarded and unwelcoming. "You have some nerve, crossing our borders uninvited," Kieran said coolly, positioning himself firmly between Damien and the village behind him. "I am here for my mate," Damien said, his voice steady despite the tension coiling tightly within him. "Your mate," Kieran repeated, his tone sharp with quiet disdain, "has found a home here that you never gave her. Perhaps you should consider, Alpha King, whether her well-being matters more to you than your own pride." Before Damien could respond, the village crowd gathered nearby shifted slightly, parting to reveal Alena walking calmly toward the tense confrontation, drawn by the commotion at the village edge. She stopped several paces away, her expression composed in a way Damien had never once witnessed during their years together at Blackthorn, steady and unshaken, entirely unlike the quiet, patient woman who once waited endlessly beside an empty golden chair. "Damien," she said simply, her voice calm despite the weight clearly carried within that single word. For a long moment, Damien simply stared at her, taking in every detail of the woman standing before him, healthier, stronger, more radiant than he remembered, her eyes holding a quiet confidence that had never once been present during their years together. Whatever words he had prepared during his long journey across the mountains seemed suddenly inadequate, insufficient for the weight of everything he had finally come to understand. "I came to find you," he said finally, his voice rougher than he intended. Alena studied him carefully, her expression unreadable, giving away nothing of the years of pain his silence had caused her, nor the strength she had built entirely without him. "You found me 3 years too late," she said quietly. "The question now, Damien, is what you intend to do with that truth." Damien did not answer immediately. The weight of Elena's question settled over him fully, heavier than anything he had faced in years, heavier even than the guilt he had carried since Seraphine's death. Around them, the village crowd watched in tense silence, Kieran standing protectively nearby, his posture guarded but his expression carefully neutral, waiting to see how this moment would unfold before deciding whether to intervene further. "I intend to make things right," Damien said finally, his voice quieter now, stripped of the commanding authority he usually carried so easily. "If you will allow me the chance to try." "Words are easy, Damien," Alena replied. "You gave me 3 years of silence wrapped in far prettier words than this. Why should I believe anything has truly changed?" "Because I finally understand what I stand to lose," Damien said, and for the first time, his voice cracked slightly, betraying an emotion he had kept carefully hidden for years. "I convinced myself that protecting my grief over Seraphine meant honoring her memory. I told myself that keeping my heart closed was a form of loyalty. But watching you build a life without me, watching you heal and grow strong somewhere I could not follow, I finally understand that what I called loyalty was simply fear. Fear of losing someone again. Fear I let control me so completely that I caused the very loss I was trying to avoid." Elena's expression remained guarded, though something in her eyes softened slightly at the raw honesty in his words. Before she could respond further, a sudden commotion erupted near the village entrance, shouts of alarm rising sharply through the evening air. Kieran turned immediately, his body tensing into full alertness. Riders approaching from the northern pass, a young guard called out, running toward them breathlessly. Wearing Thornfield colors. Moving fast. Kieran's expression darkened. Thornfield has tested our borders before, seeking to claim territory during moments of perceived weakness. Word of an Alpha King's unannounced arrival within our lands may have reached them faster than we anticipated, convincing them this is an opportune moment to strike. Alena felt her heart pound sharply, understanding immediately the danger such an attack posed, not only to the village she had come to love, but to the fragile new life she had only just begun building for herself. Without hesitation, she moved instinctively closer to the center of the village, already thinking through which herbs and remedies she would need prepared should injuries occur. How many riders? Damien asked sharply, his entire posture shifting instantly into the commanding presence of an Alpha King prepared for battle. Perhaps 30, my lord, the guard answered, addressing Kieran. Armed and moving with clear intention. Kieran began issuing orders rapidly, calling for his warriors to gather at the village edge, his calm authority evident despite the tension clearly coiled beneath his composed exterior. Damien, without waiting for invitation or permission, stepped forward to stand beside him. I may have arrived here uninvited, Damien said, his voice firm and steady, but I will not stand aside while your village faces danger, especially danger that may have been drawn here, even partially, by my own reckless arrival. Let me fight beside your warriors. Kieran studied him for a long moment, clearly torn between distrust and practical necessity. Finally, he nodded curtly. Fight well, Alpha King. We will discuss the matter of trust once this threat has passed. The battle that followed was fierce and fast, the Thornfield riders charging into the village with clear intent to claim territory through force, only to find themselves met by Ashford warriors far better prepared than they anticipated, bolstered unexpectedly by the fierce, battle-hardened strength of Blackthorn's own Alpha King fighting fearlessly alongside them. Damien moved with practiced precision, protecting villagers who found themselves caught unexpectedly in the chaos, his years of experience leading Blackthorn's own warriors proving valuable even on unfamiliar ground. Alena worked tirelessly at the healing house alongside Margaret, tending to injured warriors as they were brought in throughout the chaotic evening, her newly discovered gift proving invaluable as she worked to close wounds and ease pain with mounting confidence and skill. She barely had time to think about the danger surrounding the village, focused entirely on the immediate needs of those depending on her steady hands. It was during a brief lull in the fighting that true danger found her directly. A single Thornfield rider, separated from his retreating group and desperate to escape capture, burst suddenly into the healing house, sword drawn, eyes wild with panic rather than calculated malice. Margaret moved instinctively to shield the injured warriors resting nearby, but the rider's attention had already fixed upon Alena, recognizing perhaps some flicker of importance in her bearing that marked her as valuable, a hostage who might secure his safe passage from the village. Before he could reach her, Damien appeared suddenly in the doorway, having sensed through their weakened but still present bond that something was terribly wrong. He moved with a speed born of pure instinct, placing himself directly between Alena and the desperate rider without a moment's hesitation, disarming the man swiftly and securing him before any further harm could occur. Alena stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding from the sudden danger, staring at Damien as he turned back toward her, his expression fierce with protective urgency that she had never once witnessed directed toward her during their years together at Blackthorn. Are you harmed? He asked urgently, his hands hovering near her shoulders as though needing physical confirmation of her safety. I am unharmed, Alena managed, still catching her breath. Thanks to you. Something passed between them in that moment, a flicker of the connection that fate had marked between them years earlier, now stirring faintly beneath the surface of their strained and complicated history. For the first time, Alena felt not the hollow ache of rejection when looking at Damien, but a fragile, cautious warmth, the recognition that perhaps, beneath years of silence and grief, something real had always existed between them, waiting patiently for the chance to finally be acknowledged. The Thornfield riders retreated fully by nightfall, their attempted invasion thoroughly repelled by the combined strength of Ashford's warriors and Damien's unexpected assistance. In the following days, as the village slowly returned to its normal rhythms and injuries healed under Alena and Margaret's careful attention, Kieran approached Damien directly, his earlier hostility softened somewhat by the Alpha King's genuine assistance during the crisis. Margaret walked through the night alongside Alena, tending to the wounded warriors brought into the healing house, the small building filled with the low murmur of pain voices and quiet reassurances. Alena moved between patients with a steady focus that surprised even herself, her hands finding the source of pain instinctively, her voice calm and grounding for warriors frightened by wounds deeper than they had expected. By the time dawn broke over the mountains, most of the injured had stabilized, and Alena finally allowed herself to rest, exhaustion settling heavily over her shoulders. She found Damien outside the healing house shortly after sunrise, sitting alone on a low stone wall, his hands still faintly marked with the aftermath of battle, his expression distant and thoughtful in a way she had rarely witnessed during their years together at Blackthorn. He looked up as she approached, something vulnerable flickering briefly across his tired features before he composed himself again. "How are the wounded?" he asked. "Recovering," Alena said, sitting down beside him, close enough to speak quietly but careful to maintain distance that still felt necessary. "We were fortunate. No lives were lost, though several warriors will carry scars from tonight for a long while." "I am glad," Damien said simply, and then, after a pause, added quietly, "I am glad you were not harmed." Alena studied his profile in the pale morning light, noticing details she had rarely allowed herself to notice before, the tired lines around his eyes, the tension still held carefully in his shoulders, the quiet exhaustion of a man who had spent the entire night fighting for a village that was not his own, for people who had no reason to trust him beyond the actions he chose to take. Whatever else remained unresolved between them, she could not deny the sincerity in his effort tonight. "You fought well," Kieran acknowledged, standing beside Damien near the village training grounds. "And your concern for Alena during the attack seemed far from calculated." "It was not calculated," Damien admitted quietly. "I have spent 3 years telling myself my heart remained close to protect a memory. Watching Alena in danger reminded me, quite painfully, that some part of me never stopped caring, even when I refused to show it." Kieran studied him carefully. "What do you intend to do now?" "That is not my decision to make," Damien said. "It is Elena's. I owe her that choice, freely given, without pressure from either of us." That evening, Alena found Damien sitting alone near the edge of the village, watching the sun set slowly behind the mountains that had, for months now, become her home. She sat beside him quietly, neither of them speaking for a long moment, simply watching the golden light fade gradually into the soft blues of early evening. "I am not the same woman who left Blackthorn Castle months ago," Alena said finally, breaking the silence between them. "I can see that," Damien said. "You are stronger now. More confident. More entirely yourself than I ever allowed you to become within my own home. I built this life without you," Alena continued. "I found family I never knew existed. I discovered gifts I never knew I carried. I found friendship, and perhaps something more, with someone who valued me plainly, without comparing me to a memory I could never replace." Damien nodded slowly, absorbing her words without argument or defense. "I understand if you wish to remain here, Alena. I came seeking forgiveness, not entitlement. Whatever you choose, I will honor it, even if that choice does not include me." Alena studied him for a long moment, searching his expression for any trace of the cold indifference that had once defined their years together. She found instead genuine humility, genuine regret, and beneath it all, a fragile but undeniable warmth that had never been permitted to surface during their time at Blackthorn Castle. "The bond between us was never something either of us chose," Alena said slowly. "But perhaps what happens next can be. I am not ready to simply return to how things were, Damien. Too much has changed, in you and in me both. But I am willing to discover whether something real might still be built between us, slowly, deliberately, through choice rather than obligation." Relief and cautious hope flickered across Damien's face, though he remained careful not to overstep the fragile opening she had offered. "Then I will wait, however long it takes," he said quietly. "And this time, I will not hide behind silence while I do." Before returning to Blackthorn, Damien sought out Kieran once more, finding him near the training grounds as the young Alpha oversaw the last of the village's recovery efforts. "I owe you an apology," Damien said, "for arriving here uninvited, and for the danger my presence may have drawn toward your people." Kieran studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Apology accepted, Alpha King. Though I will say plainly, if you hurt her again, mountains will not be distance enough to keep me from answering for it. I understand, Damien said, and meant it fully. Alena spent several more weeks in Ashford territory before deciding she was ready to return to Blackthorn, taking that time to properly say goodbye to Eleanor, to Margaret, to the healing garden that had taught her so much about her own quiet strength. Eleanor embraced her warmly at the village edge on the morning of her departure. "Our door remains open always," Eleanor said. "Whatever you choose with Damien, you are Ashford blood now, and that never changes." "Thank you," Alena whispered, "for giving me the chance to find myself." The journey back across the mountains felt entirely different from the one that had carried her away months earlier. She traveled this time with Damien beside her, their conversation slow and careful at first, gradually easing into something more comfortable as the miles passed beneath them. He asked about her gifts, listening with genuine interest as she described the small healing she had learned to perform. She asked, in turn, about his years of silence, and he answered honestly, without excuse, describing the fear that had kept his heart locked away long after grief alone could explain it. Weeks later, when the next pack ball was held at Blackthorn Castle, the golden chair beside the Alpha King's throne was no longer empty. Alena stood beside Damien, dressed in a gown that shimmered with the same silver light as the night this story had first begun, though everything about the moment felt entirely different now. She had returned not as the quiet, patient bride who once waited endlessly for scraps of attention, but as a woman who had built her own strength, discovered her own worth, and chosen, deliberately and without illusion, to give this bond an honest chance. Everyone in the hall watched carefully as Damien turned to her, offering his hand openly in front of the entire gathered pack, a public acknowledgement he had refused to offer for 3 long years. Alena took his hand, not out of obligation to fate, but from a place of quiet, restored confidence, choosing this moment freely, on her own terms, at last. The music began, and for the first time since her arrival at Blackthorn Castle years earlier, Alena danced beside her mate, not as a woman waiting silently in the shadows, but as a Luna finally, truly seen.